reflect, he says, Timothy, I recall the faith of your grandmother and the faith that was in your mother. And because of that, I'm sure that you have that same type of spiritual DNA. That's very powerful. That Paul said, what was in your mother, Timothy? I'm assured that you can face this challenge because of what was inside of your mother. And so I think about the faith of my mom that was passed on through her mother. And the stories my mother would tell me about some of the struggles that they had growing up on Miles Heights and the various places that they lived throughout the city. But she talked about Grandmama, her dedication and her service, and how Grandmama, faced with all the challenges, took 9 children and raised them to be people who would be a blessing on this earth. They didn't fill up prisons. They didn't create havoc. They had their challenges, but they were prominent men and women of God in their own capacity, in their own way, in their own unique way. And so Paul says, Timothy, I know that you will make it through because of the faith of your mother. I'm confident in what your mother has imparted into you. My mother to me was like both a nurturer, but at the same time a warrior. You know, it was like living with a nurse and a drill sergeant all at the same time. You know, I mean, she was this woman, she cared so much that it was like a burning fire in her. That she wanted you to have the best. She wanted you to persevere above all things. And, you know, I think about David. David, after he was persecuted by Saul, he led to a place called a cave of Adullam. And I think 1885 Taylor Road was my mother's cave. And there were men that came to David. The Bible says they were in debt, discontent, distressed. They came to David, and David, who had killed Goliath, who was a giant killer, trained them to become giant killers themselves. And so my mother's home was a training ground. It was a preparation place. I'm beginning to understand that even more. You know, I think about you know, when I was young, I remember I was about 8 years old. It was 1986. And, you know, I used to always ask my mother tons of questions. All the time. I just had questions, you know, why is the sky blue? You know, I would ask her stuff about the Bible, you know, just questions. So I guess sometimes she said, well, I really don't know. So one day, a surprise came. There was a set of encyclopedias, World Book Encyclopedia. And for you young kids, this is before Encyclopedia Britannica was put online. This was an actual volume. You know, like
it was a book.
Each letter of the alphabet had its own volume of various topics. And so, you know, my mother I would ask her a question. She would say, well, go look it up. And so I would go look it up. And then I would come back and she would sit down with me, and then you know, I would give her a report on what I learned. And so, you know, in our own home, we had our own little library. You know, it was our own Timbuktu, so to speak. It was a place of learning. She would watch programs with me, watch the news, and ask me what I thought about it. And, you know, she would share things with me. She was constantly teaching. Always preaching to me about everything, about marriage. I mean, I'm 10 years old trying to play video games. I think 13 when I got a video game system. But even before that, I'm trying to play with my G.I. Joe. She's talking to me about marriage and relationships. And I'm like, woman, look, I'm trying to play with my G.I. Joes, my Transformers. You know, and she'd be pouring into me. You know, during the summers During the summer, she would have, I had to still wake up in the morning. You know how your parents let you
Oh,
sleep
God, no.
I still had to wake up in the morning.
Nope.
And she would, you know, there were like summer readings. Sometimes schools would have you have a read a book over the summer. She made sure every day I read. And she went to work. She would call every morning, make sure I was up, you know, reminded me to wash the dishes and making sure that I did my reading. Well, I remember one day she called and I was in a deep coma sleep. And I hear the phone ringing. It must have rang about 100 times, I realized. My heart was pacing. And so I knew who was on the other end. So I picked up the call. I tried to sound like I was awake. You know how you're still sleeping, but you try to sound like you're awake. And so of course my mother saw right through it. And man, she started lecturing me about not slacking and you know how important it is, she said, you're cheating yourself by doing this. And I'm like, well, aren't you at work right now? How are you, in like 10 minutes or something? Oh my goodness. Yeah, she would work down at National City Bank down in downtown Cleveland, calling me every single morning. Anytime before I went somewhere, I had to call her. It was just a sense of accountability, that I had to have with her. And, just making sure that I wasn't involved in any foolishness. Making sure that I enjoyed my summer, but at the same time, she was, aware, made me aware of who I was and what society may perceive of me. And then how I had to break through that. She was always imparting that. I remember, at times, we didn't always agree on things. We get into some fierce debates, some fierce arguments. And now I realize that she was more like a sandpaper that was kind of smoothing out the rough edges inside of me. She was, as the scripture says, iron that sharpened iron. That in reality, she was really pushing me to excel. Making sure that what I believed, I really believed it. That I could verify, that I could back it up. And so she trained me so well that, it's like, how can you fear anything when you've dealt with a drill sergeant? When you've had the debater of debaters to contend with. I didn't fear, growing up in East, I didn't fear the gangs in that community because I feared joining a gang because of my mother. I feared her more than whatever was out there in the street. Now, I wasn't perfect. I don't want to paint the picture that I was a perfect child, but she instilled so much in me. As much as she would get on me about, I remember when I was in Bible college, she would talk to me about, you need to write out a budget. And, I would just, use my debit card and try to call the bank to see, call up online or call to see what was in the account. And she's always going to be about, you need to write a budget. And I remember charging up, I think I had like a structured charge card, something like that. And so even though she berated me about being responsible, I remember coming home from break to find out that she had paid it off. I'm hearing people talk about how much of a giver she was. She was a tremendous giver. She would give you everything. She wanted to, she would give her advice, give her wisdom. I remember she would recount to me many times. She would tell me a story that when she was pregnant with me, how she went to church and had an elder from the congregation lay hands on her, and her prayer request was that my gifts would be used for God's glory. And when she would say that to me, it would just bring such a comfort into my soul. You know, to let me know that my life was a part of God's plan. That my mother saw that there was something inside of me that only God had given me something that was precious, that had to be developed. As Paul talked to Timothy, I call you to remind you to stir up the gift that is on the inside of you. That God gives the gift, but it's up to us to develop it. And my mother was adamant about it. She wanted me to be developed spiritually, academically, physically. That's why she made sure I ate vegetables, had balanced meals. I remember, I'm looking at Ruth, we call her Aunt Ruth. I'll go to her, she had the good cereal, like the cereal that my mom wouldn't let me eat. You know, my mother was big about sugar-coated cereals. You know, I had to eat Cheerios and shredded wheat, and stuff like that.
Hey, man.
And I really had the Cocoa Puffs and the alphabets, But she wanted to make sure that academically, everything that was on point, that I didn't settle for less, that I would be challenged. She understood that the only way to grow was to be challenged. I didn't always understand that the way to get stronger is to face resistance. And so she was my biggest advocate and my biggest opponent, and that's the opponent in the sense of settling for a lack of excellence. She was fiercely opposed to not maximizing your potential, not using what God had given you. She felt that her desire, like it was her mandate as a parent to pour into me. And I really appreciate that because, my father did not step up in that factor in my life. Not a lot of parents always do. Some parents, particularly in her situation, give up. But she owned her responsibility. She really, I'm a parent now, and I'm like, man, how do you do it alone? Or she had, her siblings and my cousins. She was always making sure that the people I hung out with or the people that were involved in my life would be good role models. Like my cousins that spoke, she would make sure that I spend time with them. With my brother. She was adamant that I spend time with my brother, with my cousins, around people who had a good, who are a good image. She was not careless about the company or people that I was around. She was really aware, conscious. She took a conscious effort to make sure that I was on point, in all aspects of life. And for that, I greatly appreciate that. For that, I realized, I can go for it. I can challenges. That if her faith lives on the inside of me, that the faith that she possessed lives on the inside of me, that I'm destined to always overcome and whatever challenge is being presented my way. I remember last year before she received the diagnosis, I was away. I was in Uganda for missions, and I had an opportunity to talk to my mother through Messenger, and we talked for about an hour. And anytime, now this was, I had a limited amount of data, but anytime I got on the phone with her, man, it'd be hours sometimes. She just had so much conversation in her. But anyway, we were